Family is supposed to be built on love and trust. Growing up, I believed my father was a good man, a devoted husband and an amazing dad. But one fateful discovery shattered that illusion. I found out that my father had been living a double life for years, hiding another wife and two children in a completely different city. What hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that my mother already knew and had chosen to keep it from us. By the time I uncovered the full extent of my father's deception, it was too late. This is the story of how my seemingly perfect family fell apart. Part 1, a picture-perfect family, or so I thought. My dad was the kind of father who made everyone believe he was the best dad in the world. He worked as a business consultant, which meant he traveled a lot. Whenever he came home, he brought us expensive gifts, designer bags for my mom, gadgets for me, dolls for my younger sister, Emma. We had a routine: Sunday morning pancakes, where Dad would tell us stories from his business trips, weekly movie nights, where he'd let us pick anything we wanted, family vacations every summer to Disneyland, Hawaii, and once even Europe. On the outside, we were a perfect family, but looking back, I realize now that there were always cracks in the illusion. A father's love. When I was younger, I adored my father. I remember running to the door every time he came home from a trip, throwing my arms around him as he lifted me into the air. "You miss me, kiddo?" he would say, ruffling my hair. I would always nod eagerly. Of course I missed him. But as I got older, things began to change. His trips became longer, his phone calls became shorter, and sometimes he didn't even come home when he was supposed to. There were birthdays he missed, holidays where he wasn't there, and each time he had an excuse. "Work's been crazy," he would say. "I promise I'll make it up to you." And I believed him, because why wouldn't I? He was my dad, he was supposed to love us. But love isn't just words and gifts. Love is being there. And deep down, I think I always knew. My father wasn't really there at all. Part 2, the first signs of deception. As I grew older, I started noticing inconsistencies in my father's stories. At first, they were small things. He would say he was in Chicago for work, but his suitcase had souvenirs from Florida. He always carried two phones, one for business and one for family. He was obsessive about his schedule, down to the minute, never late, never early. But as time passed, the red flags became harder to ignore. The locked phone. One day when I was 14, I was sitting on the couch, playing on my phone, when my dad's other phone vibrated on the table. I glanced at it. A message flashed across the screen. "I love you, can't wait to see you tonight." I froze. My heart started pounding. That wasn't from my mom. I reached for the phone. My fingers barely brushed against it before my dad snatched it away. His face was calm, too calm. "That's a work message," he said smoothly, shoving the phone into his pocket. "Nothing important." I wanted to believe him, but the way he had grabbed the phone so quickly, it didn't feel like nothing. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Part 3, the whispered call that changed everything. The real nightmare began when I turned 17. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. I was in my room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard my mom pick up a call in the kitchen. At first, her voice was calm, but then it changed. "What do you mean you're his wife?" The entire world stopped. I slowly walked toward the kitchen, my heart pounding. My mother's face was as pale as a ghost. Her hands shook as she held the phone. I couldn't hear the other person, but I could see the devastation in my mother's eyes. She whispered, "That's not possible. He has a family, we are his family." A long silence. Then she hung up the phone. Her body trembled, and that's when she saw me standing there. She opened her mouth like she wanted to explain, but no words came out. She didn't need to say anything. I already knew the truth. Part 4, the moment that shattered me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying my mother's shocked expression over and over again. I had to know the full truth, so I did something I had never done before. I stole my dad's second phone. My hands were shaking as I typed in his usual password, a birthday. It unlocked. What I found inside made me physically sick. Hundreds of texts to another woman, calling her his love. Pictures of two kids, one boy, one girl, smiling with him. Videos of my father at another house, playing the role of a loving husband and dad. I wanted to throw up. My father had a second wife, a second family, a whole other life. And I was nothing but a side character in his real story. Part 5, a secret that couldn't stay hidden. I sat on my bed, staring at the phone screen, my hands trembling. The text, the pictures, the videos, all the proof I needed. My father had a whole other life, and we were just his side family. My stomach twisted into knots. How long had he been doing this? Did Mom know? I couldn't stay silent. I needed to confront him. The confrontation. The next morning, I walked into the dining room, his second phone in my hand. Dad was sipping his coffee like it was just another normal day. I slammed the phone onto the table. His entire body stiffened. I stared at him, my voice shaking. Who are they? He blinked, pretending to be confused. Who are who? I grabbed the phone and scrolled to a picture. A picture of him and his other kids at an amusement park. I held it up to his face. Them. His expression didn't change at first. He just exhaled slowly, setting his coffee down. I didn't want you to find out this way. That was all he said. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I wanted him to deny it. I wanted him to tell me I had the wrong idea. But he didn't, because there was no excuse. I gritted my teeth. How long? He looked away. Then, after a long silence, 17 years. I stumbled back, my legs feeling like they would give out. 17 years. I was 17. That meant he had been lying to my mother since before I was even born. Everything, every birthday, every hug, every love you had been a lie. My mother's breaking point. Behind me, I heard my mother gasp. I turned to see her standing at the kitchen doorway, her hands clutching the counter like she was about to collapse. She had heard everything. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just whispered, "You promised me, Robert." Dad's face fell. He opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand, silencing him. I had never seen my mother look so broken. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I knew about the affairs," she said, "but I didn't know about them." Her voice cracked on the last word. That was when the tears came. My father, the man who had always seemed so powerful, looked small in that moment. He reached for her. "Laura, She flinched away. "Don't." Her voice was cold, so cold. "I don't ever want you to touch me again." Part 6, A Family in Ruins. For the next few days, the house felt like a war zone. My dad stayed in the guest room, avoiding me and my mother. Emma, my little sister, didn't understand what was happening. She kept asking, "Why is Daddy not eating dinner with us?" Mom would force a smile and say, "Daddy's just busy." But I could see it in her eyes. She was done covering for him. The night everything fell apart. A week later, I woke up to the sound of arguing. It was past midnight, but I could hear my parents yelling downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. "I stayed, Robert," my mother's voice cracked. "I forgave you over and over again." I tried to pretend it didn't matter. Dad's voice was low, almost pleading. "Laura, please. Don't you dare beg me," she snapped. "You don't get to beg after what you've done." Silence. Then a sound I had never heard before. My father sobbing. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he choked. My mother let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't mean to get caught." A pause. Then her voice softened. "I loved you, Robert." There was a long silence. Then the sound of footsteps on the stairs. I rushed back to my room just as my mother walked past. She had a suitcase in her hand, and I knew she was leaving him. For good. Part 7, Choosing Sides. The next morning, Mom sat me and Emma down. She took a deep breath. "We're moving." Emma's eyes widened. "What, why?" Mom hesitated, then in the softest voice. She said, "Because Daddy broke a promise." Emma was too young to understand, but I wasn't. I looked at my mother, searching her face. "We're really leaving." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I can't do this anymore." I wanted to feel relief, but instead, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. I wasn't just leaving my father. I was leaving the illusion of my family. Dad's last plea. That night, my dad knocked on my door. I didn't answer, but he came in anyway. He sat on the edge of my bed, running a hand through his hair. He looked older. "Are you going with her?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. He sighed. "You know, I never wanted this." I clenched my fists. "Then why did you do it?" His shoulders sagged. "I don't know." That made me snap. "You don't know?" I yelled. "You lied to us for 17 years and you don't know why." Tears burned in my eyes. "I trusted you." His face crumpled. "I never stopped loving you." I shook my head. "Love doesn't do this." For a moment, I thought he would argue. But then he just whispered, "I'm sorry." And for the first time, I saw the guilt in his eyes. But it was too late. Sorry wasn't enough. Part 8, The Goodbye. The next morning, we packed our bags and left. Dad didn't stop us. He just stood at the front door, watching as we drove away. I didn't look back, because looking back would only make it hurt more. Part 9, Moving On. For a long time, I struggled with trust issues. I kept wondering, what if every person I love will betray me, just like he did? But over time, I learned something important. My father's choices weren't my burden to carry. I wasn't just the daughter of a liar. I was more than that, and I refused to let his mistakes define me. Outro. Some family secrets change everything. If you were in my shoes, would you forgive him? Or would you walk away like I did? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more insane family stories.